Hi, and welcome to the Account Management Secrets podcast. Today, I'm talking with my friend Jay Nathan, who is a veteran in customer success and account management. Jay brings a ton of practical knowledge from his extensive experience in SaaS and customer-facing roles. In today's episode, Jay and I cover really important topics like financial literacy for account managers, shifting from internal KPIs to customer-centric metrics, embedding customer success across the company, the scrutiny on customer success teams and how to demonstrate value, and the shift from growth at all costs to efficiency and how that's reshaping customer success. Thanks for joining us here, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jay Nathan. Hey, Jay Nathan, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, man. Always good to see you, Alex. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Now, you have a really tremendous amount of experience in customer-facing leadership roles. You're currently at Churn, and you've previously been with Higher Logic, People Matter, Blackbaud. You've, of course, also set up these really cool and interesting communities in service of the customer success world, things like Gain, Grow, Retain, and of course, growthcurve.io, your newsletter, and then your program, Cover Your SaaS. So you are someone who has a lot of experience, a lot of opinions, and a lot of really deep wisdom to share with account managers, which I'm really excited to tap into. You know my style. My style is we're just jumping straight into the deep end of the pool. We're not going to spend a lot of time on intros because I want your experience to come through based on the conversation that we're having. So with that in mind, Jay, I'd love to start with something I know that's really near and dear to your heart and important to you, which is business acumen for account managers. So business acumen, understanding the mechanics of a business and building financial literacy for individuals who are in customer-facing account management roles. Why is this so important? Why is this critical for us to be thinking about right now?
Yeah, really good question. Well, this is going to be fun. I'm excited to do this with you. And, I have the greatest respect for what you have been doing over the past several years. And it's been a pleasure to get to know you, Alex. And so grateful you asked me to do this. Financial acumen. So I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. I started out at the end of last year, Q4 of 2024. I'm sorry, Q4 of 2023. I wanted to create a sort of a guide for customer success leaders to help justify what it was that they were doing in the business. I've been in customer success for a long time. I've been in services roles. I've been in product management. I was an engineer starting out college. So I've supported sales for years. I've run sales and marketing. So I've been all over a SaaS business. It's clear, the market's changed over the past 24 months. Customer success, which is where I've really built a lot of equity in terms of my own personal brand and investment of time and energy. But it's very clear that entire world, the customer success role in a team is under fire right now because it's expensive, right? I think there's some ways we could implement it differently that make it better. But one of the things that I wanted to do was provide a guide to helping customer success leaders justify the work that they do and the spend that comes along with the teams that they employ. And so, I've always been a student of business finance. I was actually terrible at it at college. I've learned over the past 25 years, what accounting actually looks like in the real world and why it's so important to the businesses that we run. And so I started out to create a guide for customer success leaders and quickly realized that, oh my gosh, this applies to marketing. It applies to sales. It applies to product leaders. It applies to anybody who works inside of a SaaS company. You should actually understand the business that you're in so that you can make the biggest impact no matter where you sit in the organization structure. So that's why I ended up doing it, sort of broaden the aperture beyond customer success and really we opened that up to all SaaS leaders. We had people, we created a course around it. And we have people from finance to sales to customer success and product who have a course online now. And it's been really rewarding to see how it's benefited people of different walks of life.
What I'm hearing you talk about there is something that has come up a lot for me. I've talked to literally thousands of account managers and account management teams over the last many years. And one of the main challenges is the rest of the company doesn't understand what we do. Meaning that if I were to trip over, some C-level person or maybe even the CEO themselves and say, hey, what does the account management team do? They're not going to give you a crisp answer. And when I hear you talking about this, the idea of justifying the value of our work and showing back all the great things that we're doing, this is a perennial problem for account management teams. So account management teams generally get thought of, and by the way, it's the same for customer success, and we're going to use these
Yeah.
terms sort of interchangeably, right? So I don't think
Yeah.
there's a big wall between the two. So either AM or CS, there's this idea that, oh, well, these are all like really helpful, nice people, but they're not in sales, but they do some sales related functions. And customers seem to want to talk to them a lot, but I don't really know what they do. And so what you're essentially saying is, if we can have a series of metrics or KPIs or some kind of North Star to be able to show, here's the impact that we're having, that helps to not only clarify for the rest of the organization what we're doing, but it also helps us to trumpet our wins, right? To toot our own horn, so to speak, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the reality is every team should have some kind of number, some kind of metric to show what their impact on the business is. And that number might be a financial metric, right? It might be revenue. It might be bookings. I would hope that a lot of account management teams and even a lot of customer success teams today have a bookings target, right? An
Yeah.
expansion target for existing customers. That's really important to be able to show that impact. Even if you don't have that kind of number, though, you should have another number that is a leading indicator to one of those numbers, right? So either bookings or revenue growth or even net retention, right? If you can prove your work ties directly to a business outcome, that's a really positive thing. You mentioned the word North Star, which I'll sort of dig into that a little bit. I'm a big believer that your North Star metric is not an internal business metric. We all know what the internal North Star metric is. It's almost the same for every recurring revenue business out there or in any business period, right? It's revenue growth. That is the North Star, right? And then a lot of companies have a very close secondary North Star, which is a profitability number, right? I think a North Star metric should be a customer facing metric. So what is the thing that your product or service enables that proves that the customer's getting value from your product, right? I used to sell a community software platform. And one of the things that we looked at, it seems like a very basic metric, but it was monthly active users. Because if users were logging into our customers' communities on a monthly basis, we knew that they were getting value. They were getting reach. They were touching their customers. The customers were getting value from them. So we looked at that. And that was an important metric because as a North Star for our company, because sales could impact it. You can grow that North Star metric by selling new accounts. You can grow that North Star metric by retaining the customers that you have. You can grow that North Star metric by driving adoption and getting more value into the hands of the customer so that more users come in and use the product over time. So I think a North Star is an external metric. It's a value metric for the customer. If you really don't know what this is, and sometimes it could be confusing to figure it out, to simplify it enough that everybody just understands and can rally around it, go look at your pricing page. What is your main pricing metric for your service or your product, right? Is it the number of users? Is it number of transactions, the amount of revenue, amount of cost save, whatever it is? Think about that North Star metric and how that's a leading indicator to value, which is a leading indicator to whether you're going to get a renewal or not, right? And so you can sort of map these things out and tie them back to a business financial metric if you really think critically about it.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal because one of the critiques that I've often made of a lot of sales and account management teams, customer success included, is a lot of internal navel gazing, right? We claim to be customer centric, right? The website says we're customer centric, but what we do is we measure ourselves based on all these internal metrics.
Yeah.
Could be retention or growth or profitability or some other random KPI that we have that's all internally focused. So guess what? We put all of our energy on ourselves. If on the other hand, we're saying our North Star metric is something that the customer cares about, then guess what? We are living customer centricity. So what are some of the other examples there? So you said when you were selling community software, you were looking at, well, how many people are in our customers' communities? What are other great examples of that?
Well, I mean, I can share with you what we do at my current company, Churn. So
Yeah.
Churn is a retention automation platform for think of it like high volume, low dollar customers. Probably the opposite of what account managers are doing, maybe with higher dollar accounts. But we think of the world in terms of how much we can boost the retention levels and the actual revenue saved of our customer base. And that comes in a couple of different forms, but we have dashboards and charts built into our product, right? Our CS team doesn't have to go out and tell the customer what they're saving every day. We actually send an automated email every week that shows the customer how much revenue we've been able to save and recover for them through the processes we serve. So, I mean, that I'm really fortunate, right? When you get in front of a product like that, that's gold because the product does all the work and you're just sort of pushing that value. What else? I would say well, think about a CRM platform, right? How many accounts are being created on a weekly, monthly basis?
How many deals are being won?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is the fundamental use case for a CRM, right? The pipeline management. How many deals are being won? What's the time to close on those deals? So the reality is, everybody wants the answer. They want you to tell them what the answer is when you say that. And the reality is there is no one answer. It depends on the market you serve, the product that you provide, the value proposition that you're selling, right? And if you can map those things out, then you can find the answer. And by the way, you should maybe try to make that answer a little bit different than your competitors too, so that you stand out from them. Because if everybody's talking about the same thing, then you're going to sort of get lost in the noise.
Well, there's this adage in B2B sales, right? That like people aren't coming to buy your product. They're not coming to buy your service.
Right.
They're hiring you for your expertise. And so if you can show up with a roadmap and a guide that says, here's my expertise, here's what we're going to be tracking, here's how we're going to know if we're doing well or if we need to make any changes, here's the value we're providing, here's how you can then talk about this internally, Mr. Customer or Madam Customer, right? Like that's tapping into your expertise. So when we have a customer facing North Star metric, then we get them more bought into this idea too, right? Because one of the things that happens, and this is true for SaaS, which I know is your world, but it's true in many, many other businesses I've talked to, is the customer doesn't know what they want, right? They're like, hey, I bought this thing and I think it was for reason A, but in reality, there's all this other stuff and so on. And so for us to be able to really be that strategic partner to them, that trusted advisor to them, which is what all account managers want to be, is we want to be showing up with like, here's where we're going and here's how we're going to track the value.
Yeah. And think about this, no matter what you sell, whether it's a physical good or whether it's a software product or some between, you get to see a lot as an account manager, you get to see a lot of companies that look the same every day, week, month.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a good chance. Let's just face it. 95% of the people in the world, they have blinders on. They're going in to do their job. They're not part of communities, right? They're not trying to figure out how the rest of the world is doing this and best practices. Like you have the opportunity to do that as someone who gets the privilege of seeing across, a bunch of companies in an industry or a segment, maybe even across industries outside of those segments that you can bring best practices from as well. So what the challenges are, where the opportunities are, the risks and the challenges that these individuals and the role they sit in face every day. And so yeah, like that just really resonates with me because that is the differentiator, right? And the more vertical you can go, the better, because you can be very specific in terms of how you talk to people.
I mean, I always tell AM and CS teams when I talk to them, like, more than 99% of the universe about your product and service, plus the value, plus how customers can be using this, plus what they can expect. And therefore, you need to step into that role of being the advisor and the guide for them and not let them, run with this whole thing. Let me ask you another question, which is around, so we know that, businesses today, like there's just so much focus on all these crazy numbers and dashboards. And like we were saying before, so many of them are internal, right? And I heard someone say the other day that apparently SAP used to track 5,000 KPIs as a business, right? So, I mean, obviously, it's a huge scale coming to where you just think, oh my
Uh,
God, like what a crazy number. Can't we refine this down to, the five
yeah.
things that really count or what have you? But my point is, we know that, there are people out there and they're tracking all sorts of stuff. And a leader of an account management or customer success team is constantly getting pinged for requests for data. What about this thing, et cetera. My question to you, Jay, is what are the mindset shifts that the leader has to go through to, instead of just saying, we're just going to focus on these internal metrics like we always have? What needs to change in their mindset to say, you know what, we are focusing on these customer facing North Star metrics. Here's the one that matters, and here's why.
Well, I do think, I mean, to be fair, we are running a business too, right? That's part of why, I wanted to tie everything back to the financial metrics, because if you can't justify what you're doing from a business standpoint, you're not going to be around very long. There's, especially in this economy where efficiency is now more important than it's ever been, particularly in technology world that I live in, and you live in as well. But so I think the mindset shift is get the foundation right. Like, yes, every team, like if you're running a go-to-market team and you have marketing efforts and you have sales efforts, then you should have very clear metrics on, lead volumes, conversion rates, all the basics, the blocking and tackling. Like you can't forego all of that stuff, right? Because yes, people are going to have questions, and that's, you know, so I think part of the transition is, first focus on the business basics, getting that in place, get somebody dedicated to that. I'm in an Turnkey is an early stage startup. There are 13 employees, including me, in this company right now.
Nice.
You,
Awesome.
you know what this is like, right?
Yeah, it's great.
And so some things you do yourself. But as you start to scale, one of the key hires I think we can make in our business is an operations hire, somebody who can just keep the data flowing, keep the metrics in place and check. Um, the mindset shift is probably this. We always have to keep in mind that a, a metric is a proxy for something that's happening in the real world, right? And it's usually an imperfect proxy for that. So if you can sort of take metric, you always have to take metrics with a grain of salt. Jeff Bezos has a really good quote that says, "Hey, if I see data and anecdotes that are disagreeing with one another, I'm going to blame the data for being wrong, and the anecdotes are probably right." So, you know, I think there are a lot of people, especially in my industry, the technology industry, who want to automate and put everything on rails, everything measured, monitored, got these dashboards. If you rely solely on that information, you are going to likely miss something, right? You have to scan a lot of different parts of the business, a lot of different signals that are coming in as a leader to know what's really going on the ground with your customers, with the market, your people. Um, so anyway, I'm sort of all over the place on this, but like get the foundation right and then start, but don't ever listening. Don't ever stop getting out into the spaces where you work, into the market that you serve. There's this other concept called management by wandering around. I actually can't remember who came up with this initially, but it was heavily employed at HP when HP launched, like literally starting Silicon Valley back in the day. And actually, it was HP, and it was Bob Noyce who started Intel, right? And he would just go walk around, and they would interact with their teams, and they would listen, and they would you have two ears, one mouth, right? So you listen more than you talk. You see what's going on with your own eyes, and you can help use that information to help adjust your strategy. It's not really all about metrics, but particularly with the North Star kind of concept, then you can, once you have that bedrock of like, okay, we have our financials in house in order. We know the things that impact our financials, our conversion rates, our lead volumes, all that kind of stuff, our renewal rates, for example. Then you can start layering on the things that you hear that impact all those business metrics. So it's, you asked about making the transformation to that. I do think there's a good case to be made for getting some of the basics in place first, and then just listening, and then institutionalizing things a little bit at a time, and building this um, structure of metrics and data to work with.
To me, it's about two things. It's about, number one, are we really being customer centric? So, we claim to be, but are we? And exposing metrics that are customer facing actually makes us be more customer centric, right? Because all of a sudden
I think
we are
so.
orienting toward what our customer is caring about. The other mindset shift that I can imagine happening here is like really being curious to understand what's happening in the business. Like, what are the dynamics of the business? And, you know, one of the things that we see happen like so often across companies of different sizes is we get in this stasis and we get in this view that like, I'm the expert. I know what's happening. I'm no longer curious about how the market is responding, about what people are doing about it. And, you know, I was on a podcast a couple months ago when I said, I think curiosity is actually the number one superpower for an account manager, because this way you can go in there and really find reality. And as we know, the person who gets closest to reality is the one who wins. And
Yes.
on this thought around curiosity, you know, one of the things that I will say always confuses me and partly just drives me completely nuts is the way account management teams and customer success teams sometimes hide behind things like surveys or NPS instead of going out and talking to customers and asking the difficult questions. You know, like they spend time in front of customers and then they just like, I've seen this happen a million times. Like account managers get so nervous in front of a client and they're just like racing through their presentation and they just want to get the QBR or the meeting over with or whatever it is. And then they don't ask the meaningful questions. And it's those questions that are going to unlock all the potential for this account. And it's those questions that are going to uncover all the risks that we may not see. So, I don't know what your thoughts on are like using time with customers to ask
Oh
valuable
my
questions,
gosh.
but
Yeah. I
I think it's a
mean,
big deal.
our friend Bob London talks about this all the time, right? And yeah, I'll tell you, it goes beyond just account managers and customer success managers and salespeople. I I've I've been on QBRs with customer success companies who I was a customer of, whose CEOs were in those calls and presented at me for 40 minutes without asking me a single question. I'm like,
Woo.
man, yeah, I'm not calling anybody out here, but I mean, there's only a few you can probably guess, but, yeah, I mean, it's this idea that talking at your customer, presenting everything about you in the meeting, you're trying to get your point across constantly. I think we do this in marketing, we do this in sales, we do this in account management and customer success. It's really all about us, right? And just making a little pivot to like, hey, here's something we're seeing in the industry real briefly, right? Here's a trend that we're picking up on. Curious what your perspective is on that, and then sit back and listen, right? And people are going to talk to you and they're going to give you the secrets, right? They're going to give you everything you need to build a business that is going to be sustainable and give you new ideas for products. So what you just said totally resonates with me.
I mean,
Totally.
even the idea of like, you know, and I know you've written some of this stuff on LinkedIn and in your growth curve newsletter, but you know, the point of you have this opportunity with your client, you want to ask them, hey, what made you choose us back in the day, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it was, and how's it going? And anything else I should know? Like the really open questions, and you're going to get a ton more information if you just like send them an NPS survey.
Yeah. Or try to tell them how well they're doing. Right? They know how well they're doing. They know what they think of you and your product, right? So yeah, I think a lot of times, a couple of things, I think people are a little intimidated by the truth. But you also said this earlier too, like truth is what you're seeking. And if you get that truth, then you can do something about it, right? If you know you're in a yellow or an orange or a red state with a customer, God, I'd rather know that, right? Bad news early is good news is what I always tell my teams, right? So like, don't shy away from that. Have the real conversation. By the way, it's just a human thing to do too. Like nobody wants to look at your slides. Nobody wants to look at my
Right.
slides. Like I run sales calls all the time right now. And, sometimes I think, man, I got to get a nice sales deck together. Every week I think this, I'm like, I need a few slides. I probably do. But, and then I'm like, you know what? People don't want slides. They want a conversation, right? They want to really understand. Sometimes I might need a visual to back me up and that's cool, but don't make it all about you in your slides, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Uh, Moving on to a different topic, but something that's very alive in 2024. You mentioned that this is the era of efficiency, and everyone's kind of made it very clear that the era of growth at all costs is over, and companies are changing their dynamic. And this is true not just in the SaaS world. This is true, universally. Companies are getting a lot more cautious about where they're making investments. They're getting a lot more scrutiny to how they're spending money. And one of the areas that is totally in the crosshairs right now is customer success, especially in the SaaS world, but also true in non-SaaS. So in the SaaS world, so many people are now waking up to say, hang on a second, what are we doing with this, 10-person team, 20-person team, 500-person team, whatever it is? Would we be just as good, just as well off without them, or with half of them, or what have you? So there's so much scrutiny around customer success right now. Now, I don't think anyone is out there claiming that we don't want customer success as the end goal here, that the idea of customer success is a bad one, but there's a lot of trouble in justifying the value that these teams are bringing. Like, what are you seeing around there, and how are you working with or coaching people around those conversations?
Oh man, we're gonna have to do a whole new podcast on this one, Alex. There's a lot to unpack here. Um, so I think customer success, it's if you look back 50, 60 years to the manufacturing quality movement, and there's a guy named Ed Powers who sort of brought this correlation together for me, and I wrote about it a few
Yeah,
weeks ago.
I know. Eddie's in Colorado,
Yeah,
like me.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
right. He's a Colorado guy.
yeah.
But if you look back, and I did some research and reading into the history of quality assurance in manufacturing. And what happened in the early days of QA or QC, quality control, is that, and I probably won't get all the details right because I'm not a historian on quality, but I did do a little research. And what they did in the early days, they had inspection teams that came after the product was designed, after it was manufactured, right before it shipped. They let the inspection team review and look at the product to make sure it was quality before it went out. Well, guess what? That resulted in a lot of waste, right? Because you've already gone through the process of designing and building the product right before you shipped it out. You basically put a filter on the front end, right? And then you started building these big quality teams to manage quality. But then over time, you look at Toyota back in the 80s, they had a total quality management mindset. And what that meant is that quality was going to be embedded into every part of the manufacturing process, starting with how the product was conceived, who it was designed for, how it was designed, manufactured. Anybody on the manufacturing line, if they saw a problem, they could pull a cord and stop the whole thing,
It
right?
was like
That was a hallmark.
totally end to end, and it was like an inherent quality in the DNA of the business.
Exactly. Exactly. And it changed the game in terms of the quality of products that were shipped. I mean, quality of products that were shipped back then, it was so bad at times that there was legislation, there were groups formed to basically fight manufacturers and go sue them, right? For because their products did damage, and so that all changed. Products have gotten a lot better. So anyway, the whole correlation there is like we should think about customer success the same way. When there's a new movement afoot, you often do need a new organizational structure to help espouse and engender that. But as it scales, then you need to fold it into the way the organization works, the way the business just works from end to end. Customer success is who are we designing our software product for, right? If you're in the software world, who are you designing it for? You need to understand that before you start building. How are you designing it for them? What does their day-to-day usage look like? What do you anticipate that to be? How do you position and sell it? How do you deploy it and service it? Like all those things, they depend on getting product right, not getting a team right after the fact to make sure the product isn't off the rails. There are a lot of sort of what I would call maybe legacy technology products today that need a lot of handholding because they weren't built and designed that way. But you look at some of the products that we have today, especially product-led growth companies. Think about Calendly, right? Or Canva, great example. You don't need any coaching on how to use Canva. You just log in and you start figuring out how to use it. They put a lot of energy and effort into designing that product. So that's sort of the backstory there. I, you know, because of all these gaps everywhere else, customer success teams ended up being built up into the team that was quote unquote responsible for driving customer results and outcomes and quality for software companies. And they started taking a lot of responsibilities from parts of the organization that should have held those responsibilities. And the other parts of the organization were able to sort of throw their hands up and say, hey, well, we don't really need to do customer communication out of marketing because we have a customer success team. They're going to do that, right? We don't
Ah,
we don't need to make the product simpler to implement because we've got people, they're going to do that, right? On the
right.
implementation team under the umbrella of customer success. We can build a bigger support team. So I think that's a big problem. We've introduced another organization into, or another department into the organization structure of a lot of companies. And it's caused a lot of confusion, a lot of abdication, and a lot of just extra cost.
Well, it's interesting the way that you phrase that. It's like, hey, we create this new team, and team's called customer success. But then, of course, the CSMs want to do stuff, and so like they're taking responsibility from other areas, so that might reduce effectiveness or change the way that we've been working, and doesn't necessarily improve the outcomes for our customers. That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. It's almost as though in the effort to justify their existence, they're taking on extra work, taking away from other people, and then people are now turning around saying, "Well, hang on, why don't we have this built into our corporate DNA? Why isn't customer success just like a thing that we do?"
Yeah, exactly. And we've undermined ourselves by doing it, in my opinion.
Interesting.
And
Yeah,
listen,
yeah,
I'm a customer success guy, right? I'm
right,
saying this, right? But it's because I've seen literally hundreds of companies. I've talked to thousands of people
sure.
who have built this. And every week I have a call with somebody else who's like, yeah, like, we've got this white glove concierge customer success thing going on. And, our my CFO's telling me it's too expensive and I got to cut it. Well, damn right you do, right? Because it doesn't make sense anymore. So there's a whole lot behind that. There's different ways to combat that. You have to have a great support team. You have to have a great product development team and a great product design process. You have to have enablement. Like a well written, cultivated knowledge base is worth its weight in gold for most companies, whether you serve enterprise or mid
Sure.
market or SMB. Like
Right.
there's just these basic things that you can do that aren't that difficult. And we've actually been doing it for decades. This is not Customer success to me is not a new thing. It's just a new name and a moniker on something. And in a lot of ways, has been proliferated by vendors, in my opinion. So
That's
software vendors.
really that's a super interesting way of looking at it. And for me, it brings up this question of like, where do we think this is going in terms of the org structure? So if I again like if my very imperfect knowledge about how total quality management worked was not so much that there's like some big organization that's in charge of it, but rather we now have ambassadors or people whose part-time job in different sections of the company is to make sure the quality is being implemented and cared about. So is the thought that customer success sort of dissolves as its own entity, and instead we have people responsible for the being the eyes and the ears and the voice of the customer in different parts of the company? Or like, how do you see that breaking
Yeah.
down?
Yeah. I mean, we should have always had that. A product manager's job is to be the eyes and the ears of the product development process, right? And by the way, like when I was in product management, we implemented Marty Kagan's, and he wrote a book. There's a guy named Marty Kagan. He's a very well-known product leader. Silicon Valley Product Group is the name of his company. He's consulted with every major software business probably you've ever heard of. He's amazing. But we implemented his process when I was at Blackbaud. And the process was you have an engineer, a product designer, and a product manager, and they're responsible for what's the value proposition? Is it usable, the designer, and is it feasible, the engineer, right? How are we going to actually build it? You take that triad of people and you put them on the front end of the product development, Scrum, the design process so that they are all talking to the customer together, right? We shielded our engineers from product. We shielded our designers, I'm sorry, from customers. We shielded our designers and even our product managers in some cases from the customer. I went to a customer marketing conference last year And the number one complaint that I heard in that customer marketing conference with a bunch of people who sit in the marketing organization whose job it is to understand the customer, to recruit customers to do advocacy with us and for us, to tell their stories, get feedback. The number one complaint that I heard from those customer marketers is that they don't have access to the customer.
Whoa.
Yeah, they're being gate kept by guess who? Account management and customer success and sales, right? So we need to train people on how to interact with customers in an intelligent way. We need to hire people who can do that well, right? But product team should be able to go directly to the customer. Marketing should be able to go directly to the customer. Everybody should have access to the customer voice directly, because when you get things filtered through to you, you're going to miss a whole bunch of stuff, right? And if you're responsible for building the product, you're never going to build it right unless you're talking directly to the customer.
Wow. So expect some major changes in how companies are thinking about and implementing customer success going forward is the message that I'm hearing here. One of the things that you
think so.
I think it sounds almost inevitable. And it sounds like we're moving in that direction, especially given the cost pressures that a lot of these teams are under.
Well, that's going to drive it. That's going to drive it in my mind. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
No, you mentioned white glove or concierge service. So in the strategic account space, the key account space, a lot of people pride themselves on providing very high levels of service to customers. And I want to get your perspective on, is this best off as a paid engagement? Is this best off as part of what you get when you buy from us? Like how does one think about that? Because I've seen both. So I've seen companies both say, hey, there's maybe different tiers of our account management. If you want the top tier, it's going to cost you extra. And I've also heard people say, well, hey, for $1 million account, I'm going to throw in an account manager to make sure that the customer is successful and that they renew and expand with us. How do you think about the paid versus free model there?
It's a very good question, and there's a lot of depth that can go into the answer. But so every customer, and again, it probably doesn't matter what you sell, but we'll just keep it pretty generic because I know there's a varied audience here. Every customer should be, they're entitled to some type of enablement, right? But enablement can be, again, your knowledge base. It can be your webinars that you do for customers. We actually have a webinar we do every 2 or 3 weeks for our customer base, where we bring as many customers who are willing to join a Zoom call, and we teach a new concept and we get their feedback too. Guess what? We listen on those calls and we learn too. So they're really valuable in multiple ways. So you've got enablement. You've got an onboarding experience, right? That could be a high touch onboarding experience that your product needs, or it could be a low touch self-serve onboarding experience, but everybody should have an onboarding experience that works for your market, for your product, for your customers. Everybody should have the ability to contact support and get a quick result or a quick resolution to a problem that they have. And this is where we start to get mixed up, because a lot of times account management teams and customer success teams end up moving into that support world, right? And then they become a support person, not a customer success person, not an account manager anymore, right? That's a problem. But there should be some kind of support function. So now you've got sort of enablement, support, and onboarding for all of your customers. On top of that, yes, you should consider providing premium service offerings. But what I would do, and what I always try to do in the companies that I work in and with, is package those in a way that makes sense. So yeah, if you have $1 million customer and you want to provide a higher level of service, that's great. But let's define what it is, right? And if it's value added to the customer, if it's a consulting, anything where there's a one-on-one assignment where I'm doing specific work for a customer, especially in a software business because people are so expensive, then that's probably a paid consulting offering, is the way I think about it, right? If it's one to many, then you should be entitled to that typically, right? Whether it's our knowledge base or our community or all of our enablement resources and support, anything that's one to many, then, that's going to be included in the subscription or in the price of the product itself. So there's a lot to, and I think that's a key skill that a chief customer officer or even a chief revenue officer needs to have, is how to think about commercializing all the offerings, not just the product, but how do you bundle the service offerings, the support offerings in with that? And there's a lot of depth we can go into there.
So would you put QBRs in that bucket? Like if I'm doing a quarterly business review, is that something that only a certain tier would get? And maybe that's a paid tier, for example?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's something I would consider. I would also, a lot of times QBRs can be just as helpful for us as they are for the customer
Hmm.
because we get to uncover opportunities to expand into the account if we do it well and do it right. So yeah, that's something that I would consider maybe charging for, but probably as a bundle, probably included in a bundle of premium services for the customer.
Yeah. Well, all this makes me wonder, will customers care more and feel more invested if they're actually paying for account management services and customer success services? Because we know right now, a lot of times the customer doesn't value them particularly highly, right? Often
Yeah.
people don't show up to the QBR, this sort of thing. If suddenly it's a paid line item, do I pay more attention than if I just feel like it's being thrown in for free?
Yeah. It's a great question. There's a distinction here too. I think you got to be careful to charge not for a role, but for a discrete service provided by somebody who has a particular title or role, right? Um, the generic like, hey, you get a dedicated. I can't stand when people say this. You get a dedicated customer success manager. Well, that's not really true, right? Because dedicated means something very specific. Now, you might say designated.
Right.
That's cool. But what is that going to do with and for you? What value are they going to provide? And then how are you going to monetize it? Everything has to be monetized, right? We got to a point, especially over the past 10 or 15 years when interest rates have been next to zero, that just like in sales, we've got these big BDR teams that are now like, this is not working anymore, right?
Hmm.
Customer success was the same way. And so it created this pressure on everybody to have a customer success team because you could just go to the next company over and they're like, oh yeah, you get a designated customer success manager. They're going to help. They're going to be your white glove. I've heard salespeople say this and it pains me every time. They'll be your white glove support, right? And you're like, no, don't say that. We need a support team. Customer success is something completely different. Um, so I think I've gotten off track of your question, but that is like, yes, we have cost pressure now to do this right. We used to do it right. And I hate to say that, like be the old crotchety guy. I think we really did used to do this right in a lot of ways. And then this sort of customer success mindset came in and started taking everything over. And now we got to sort of revert back to the mean of, regular interest rates and scrutiny on investments and costs and that kind of thing, which is going to bring everything back to normal and make us get more realistic about how we do these things.
Well, I mean, hopefully, what winds up happening here is just like with the quality movement, outcomes improve, right? Things get
Yeah,
better for customers when we adopt these mindsets. When we truly become customer centric, then we're living that way, and it's built into the company's ethos, and the customer is the beneficiary, and that's really what we're
yeah,
looking to drive here. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, hey,
exactly.
Jay Nathan, thank you so much for this incredible cross section conversation around the life of an account manager and of a CSM and what's working today. It sounds like there's a lot of change ahead. What do you think is coming up in the next sort of year or two as we digest out of this period of growth at all costs into the period of efficiency? What else do you think is going to be happening?
Oh man, I've never been really good at predictions, so but I do think we'll have we'll have to continue staying prudent. I think the world of venture capital is changing a lot. I think private equity and seed investing is probably where we'll see a lot of activity in the future. I think the gig is a little bit up on the VC model that's been created over the years, um, and uh, technology is a new business area. Again, that's the area that I spend most of my time in. And I think we'll see it sort of, it will still be high growth, but I think we'll see it sort of go back sort of to a more normal course of business. You see it now. All the publicly traded companies are highly profitable now, right? Same expectations are going to exist for private equity backed, VC backed, early stage companies. My company, Turnkey, part of the reason I wanted to join this business, it's a startup, but they didn't go raise a bunch of money. They figured out how to get to break even, as a bootstrap business. And I thought that was going to be really, really valuable for the founders and for me as an executive there. So I think you'll see more and more of that, more prudent, operations as we go forward.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Jay Nathan, really appreciate you being here. Great to see you.
Yeah, you too, man. This was a lot of fun. Do it anytime.
Thanks so much.